Every one of us carries within an unseen companion parts of ourselves hidden from the world and often hidden from our own awareness. This is the side of us where fears, insecurities, suppressed desires, and forgotten wounds reside. For much of life, this hidden energy can control us, shaping our choices and sabotaging our growth without us even realizing it. It speaks through sudden anger, unexplained jealousy, or self-sabotage when things finally start going right. But there comes a moment in a person's journey when this inner shadow no longer dictates the direction of their energy. When this happens, life feels lighter, more authentic, and deeply aligned. How do you know when this transformation begins? There are unmistakable signs, signals that you are no longer being ruled by what you've buried inside, but are instead moving into a state of wholeness and freedom. Let us explore these signs. There comes a time in the journey of the soul when the storms within no longer dictate the weather of your days. For so long, we are held hostage by what lies beneath our awareness, by the unacknowledged wounds, the hidden resentments, and the forgotten fears that silently whisper in the dark chambers of our psyche. These forces are subtle yet powerful. They show themselves not in our calm moments, but in the flash of anger, the sting of jealousy, the rush of defensiveness. They erupt suddenly, as if another hand were pulling the strings of our behavior. And indeed, that hand belongs to the shadow. But the moment you begin to see that you are not merely a creature of reflex, that you can meet life with presence rather than impulse, is the moment your shadow loosens its grip on your energy. Consider the one who, for years, carried deep wounds of inadequacy. Every comment, every slight remark, was felt like an arrow piercing straight into their chest. When a colleague made a suggestion, it felt like an insult. When a partner offered feedback, it felt like betrayal. The shadow, carrying old pain from a childhood where love was conditional or recognition was scarce, demanded reactivity. It whispered, "You are not enough, and you must defend yourself at all costs." And so, this person would snap, withdraw, or attack, not because the present moment called for it, but because the shadow insisted upon replaying the old wound again and again. But then something remarkable happens when the inner work begins. When those buried wounds are brought into the light, when one has the courage to sit with the uncomfortable truths of their past and accept them as part of their story, the energy shifts. The same criticism that once drew blood now lands softly, no longer piercing the heart but touching the surface of awareness. Instead of reacting, the individual pauses, breathes, and responds. A question replaces defensiveness. Is there wisdom in this? Is there truth I can use? Or perhaps a simple boundary is expressed calmly. I hear you, but I see it differently. The shadow, once the master of their emotional life, has been integrated into the whole. It no longer demands a fight at every moment. This is not a small shift. It is the difference between being a puppet pulled by invisible strings and being the conscious actor in your own life. When you move from reaction to response, you reclaim your power. You are no longer an echo of your past, but a participant in your present. Imagine the freedom of walking into a heated discussion and no longer being carried away by the waves of anger, but instead standing in the calm of your own center. That is the freedom of one whose shadow no longer dominates. Yet, the shadow does not surrender easily. It thrives in chaos, in those moments when the emotional body is stirred like a storm. Think of the driver cut off in traffic, instantly enraged as though dignity itself had been stolen. Think of the lover who interprets silence as rejection and lashes out, desperate to be seen. These are the places where the shadow lingers, feeding on unconscious patterns. But to notice these moments, to catch oneself in the midst of them, is already a victory. Awareness is the key that unlocks the door between reaction and response. When you begin to notice your triggers without immediately succumbing to them, something inside shifts. Perhaps someone raises their voice, and instead of shouting back, you ask yourself, why does this stir me so deeply? What old wound is this touching? You recognize that the current moment is not the same as the past moment your body remembers. The present is free, yet the shadow tries to pull the past into it. In choosing not to follow, you are no longer enslaved by the memory of old wounds. This freedom extends beyond personal relationships. In workplaces where egos often clash, the difference between reaction and response can alter the course of an entire career. A leader who reacts with defensiveness to every challenge creates division and mistrust. But a leader who responds with composure and curiosity builds respect and unity. The shadow can destroy the bonds that hold communities together, while its integration creates harmony. In families, too, the story is the same. A parent who reacts with anger to a child's mistake passes down the same wounds they once endured. But a parent who responds with patience, who sees the child's error as part of growth rather than rebellion, breaks the cycle. In that pause, in that choice, generations are healed. It is important to understand that responding rather than reacting does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean suppressing anger or denying pain. It means allowing these emotions to arise, but not letting them control the wheel. Anger may still appear, but it becomes a messenger rather than a master. You hear its warning, you understand its purpose, and you act consciously rather than blindly. In this way, every emotion is honored, but none are given unchecked power. The power of response lies in its spaciousness. Reaction is immediate, cramped, unthinking. Response contains a breath, a pause, a moment of reflection. In that pause, wisdom enters. In that pause, compassion enters. And in that pause, you step out of the grasp of the shadow and into the freedom of your own conscious will. Life will continue to test you. There will always be moments where the shadow attempts to reassert itself. A betrayal may cut deep. A failure may stir the old feelings of shame. A harsh word may awaken forgotten fears. But with each test, you discover the growing strength within. Where once you reacted with chaos, now you respond with clarity. Where once you were bound by old patterns, now you walk in the freedom of new choices. This is not perfection. It is wholeness. It is the integration of your hidden self into the fullness of who you are. To no longer be dominated by the shadow is not to eliminate it. The shadow remains, as it always will, as part of the totality of your being. But it is no longer an unseen tyrant pulling your strings. It becomes instead a guide, showing you where the wounds lie, where healing is needed, and where growth is possible. And as you continue to meet life not with reaction but with response, the shadow becomes an ally rather than an enemy, a source of wisdom rather than a source of destruction. The moment you choose to pause, to breathe, and to respond thoughtfully, you step into a higher order of being. You take back the energy that was once trapped in cycles of pain and redirect it toward creation, love, and purpose. That is the sign that your shadow no longer dominates your energy. It is not a distant dream. It is a choice available in every moment. And each time you choose response over reaction, you reclaim a piece of yourself, until at last you stand whole, free, and unshaken by the storms that once ruled you. There is a quiet freedom that comes when you no longer live under the illusion of perfection. For much of life we are taught to polish the surface, to present only the admirable parts of ourselves while concealing the rest, the hidden impulses, the unkind thoughts, the small envies or selfish desires. we banish them to the shadows, pretending they do not belong to us. But what we exile does not disappear. It waits, and when it finds no welcome in our own heart, it seeks expression through judgment of others. The flaw we cannot admit in ourselves, we condemn in those around us. The anger we deny erupts as moral outrage at another's temper. The selfishness we bury shows up in constant accusations that others are self-serving. In this way, the shadow projects itself outward, creating division between ourselves and the world. To live in this state is exhausting because it requires endless vigilance. You must constantly defend the mask of virtue, constantly deny the whispers within, and yet, despite all your effort, the mask cracks. A moment of weakness slips through, and shame follows. The shadow seizes it and whispers, "You are unworthy, you are flawed, you are not enough." And so the cycle continues: denial, projection, judgment, shame. But when the shadow begins to loosen its grip, something remarkable occurs. You begin to look inward with honesty, and for the first time you do not turn away. You see your imperfections clearly, and instead of despising them, you acknowledge them as part of your humanity. You admit, yes, I am capable of envy. Yes, I have moments of pride. Yes, I have felt fear and acted out of selfishness. These admissions do not diminish you, they free you. They allow you to stand in truth without the burden of pretending to be flawless. The relief of this acceptance is profound. No longer must you hide behind projection. No longer must you waste energy condemning others for the very traits you secretly carry. When you embrace your imperfections, judgment softens. You begin to see others not as enemies of your image, but as companions in the shared struggle of being human. Their flaws mirror your own, and so instead of judgment, you feel understanding. Instead of condemnation, you feel compassion. Consider the parent who, for years, demanded perfection from their children. Their own inner critic, sharpened by childhood experiences of harsh discipline or withheld approval, left no room for mistakes. Each error their child made felt intolerable because it awakened the unaccepted flaw within themselves. So they pushed harder, corrected more harshly, believing they were shaping their children into something better. But what they were truly shaping was fear, the same fear that had once lived in them. Then something changes, perhaps through exhaustion, perhaps through reflection, or perhaps through a moment of clarity born out of love. The parent begins to see their own imperfections. They remember the mistakes of their youth, the failures that once filled them with shame, and instead of pushing them away, they embrace them as part of their story. With that acceptance comes a softening. Suddenly, their child's error is no longer a reflection of their own denied imperfection, but a natural step in growth. The harsh words dissolve into patience. The relentless expectations give way to encouragement. This change is not merely in the way they treat their child. It is a transformation of the soul. It is the shadow releasing its grip. The acceptance of imperfection does not make us weaker, it makes us real. The pursuit of flawlessness, far from lifting us up, isolates us. It builds walls between ourselves and others. It breeds resentment because no one can ever meet the impossible standard we secretly impose. But the acceptance of imperfection tears down those walls. It allows intimacy, because only when we allow others to see our cracks can they truly connect with us. To love and to be loved requires the courage to be seen as we are, not as a polished image, but as a whole human being carrying both light and shadow. Even in communities, the shift is palpable. A leader who hides their flaws will inevitably breed distrust, because their humanity is concealed behind a brittle mask. But a leader who admits mistakes, who shows vulnerability, inspires loyalty. Their acceptance of imperfection grants permission for others to do the same, creating a culture where growth is valued more than appearances. The shadow, once projected outward as harsh criticism of others, dissolves into collective understanding. This acceptance is not an excuse for recklessness. It is not a call to indulge in every impulse or to shrug off responsibility. It is, rather, the recognition that imperfection is the soil from which growth emerges. Just as a seed must break its shell to sprout, so too must we stumble, falter, and learn. Every flaw holds within it the potential for wisdom. Pride teaches humility, envy points to unfulfilled desires, fear guides us to courage. When the shadow no longer dominates, these imperfections are not threats to be hidden, but teachers to be listened to. Think of the friendships you have known. The deepest bonds are not with those who seem flawless, but with those who dare to be real. A friend who admits their struggles, who confesses their doubts and mistakes, offers you the freedom to do the same. There is no pretense, no judgment, only connection. The acceptance of imperfection is what makes intimacy possible. It allows love to flow, not as admiration for a perfect image, but as a recognition of shared humanity. And so, when you accept imperfection in yourself, you begin to accept it in others. The harsh critic within falls silent, and the critic without dissolves. The colleague who makes an error, the stranger who lashes out, the loved one who falters, all of them reflect the same struggles you carry within. Instead of condemnation, you offer empathy. Instead of pushing them away, you draw nearer. This is the transformation of energy, where once the shadow created division, now there is unity. To live in this state is to walk with a quiet confidence. You no longer fear being unmasked, because you have nothing left to hide. You are no longer consumed by the exhausting pursuit of flawlessness, because you have embraced the truth of your humanity. And in that embrace, you discover a deeper strength than perfection could ever offer. The strength of authenticity, the strength of compassion, the strength of wholeness. There is a particular heaviness that comes from living with parts of yourself you have refused to face. It is not the heaviness of a long day's work, nor the weariness of a body that needs rest. It is a deeper fatigue, one that sits inside the soul and quietly drains it. People describe it as a constant tiredness, a lack of motivation, a restlessness that no amount of sleep or distraction can fix. This is the weight of the shadow, the burden of carrying unacknowledged wounds, regrets, and fears. When these hidden forces dominate your life, they consume enormous amounts of energy just to be kept out of sight. It is like holding a beach ball underwater. Your hands may be strong enough to keep it submerged for a while, but all your effort is spent on the task, leaving little energy for anything else. And so, life under the shadow feels heavy. You wake in the morning already tired. You sit down to begin something meaningful, but find yourself paralyzed by doubt or distracted by endless diversions. You want to move forward, but it feels as though invisible ropes tie you to the ground. These ropes are made of guilt that whispers you are not worthy. They are woven from regret that says you have already failed. They are strengthened by resentment that insists the world is against you. Even when nothing in the present is wrong, the past clings to you and drains your vitality. But the transformation comes when you begin to turn toward what has been hidden, when you face the wounds instead of burying them. Slowly the ropes loosen. The energy once trapped in keeping the shadow suppressed is freed. Instead of leaking through anxiety, defensiveness, or procrastination, that energy returns to you, and you feel it not only in your body but in your spirit. Suddenly, mornings are lighter, tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable, ideas that were stuck begin to move, It is not that life has become easier, it is that the inner battle has quieted, and with that silence, energy flows again. Take the example of an artist who has longed to paint, but sits each day before a blank canvas, frozen. The shadow whispers in their ear, "You are not talented enough, you will embarrass yourself, others will laugh." And so the brush remains dry, the colors unused, the energy drained not in the act of creation, but in the war against self-doubt. Yet when the shadow's grip is released, when the artist accepts the fear of inadequacy, looks at it directly, and chooses not to be ruled by it, the dam breaks. The brush moves with ease, the colors flow, and the hours pass like moments. The energy that was once consumed in suppressing the fear is now given to the joy of creating. Or consider the professional who spends endless hours procrastinating. On the surface, it looks like laziness, but underneath the shadow is at work. Perhaps it whispers, if you succeed, you will be judged. If you fail, you will be exposed. And so, the safer path is delay, distraction, avoidance. But this safety is costly, for it drains vitality. The mind spins, guilt builds, and exhaustion follows. Yet when the fear is faced, when the shadow is brought into the light, the cycle breaks. The same person who once wasted hours avoiding begins to complete tasks with surprising focus and energy. What changed was not the difficulty of the work, but the absence of the inner war. This shift is not just about productivity, it is about life itself. When energy flows freely, you feel more alive. Your relationships deepen because you are no longer too exhausted to be present. Your creativity flourishes because the channels are no longer blocked by inner conflict. Even your body feels the difference, as the stress that once tightened your muscles and clouded your mind begins to release. It is as though a weight you did not realize you were carrying suddenly falls away, and you can stand taller, breathe deeper, and see more clearly. The shadow is heavy because it thrives on resistance. Every time you deny a part of yourself, every time you bury a memory, every time you refuse to face an uncomfortable truth, you add another stone to the backpack you carry. At first it seems manageable. You tell yourself, "I can bear this." But as the years pass, the stones pile higher until your steps slow, your back bends, and life feels unbearable. When you finally take the stones out one by one, when you look at them in the light and accept them as part of your story, you discover the astonishing lightness of being. This lightness is not careless. It is not the absence of responsibility. It is the presence of alignment. Your inner life no longer pulls you in conflicting directions. The energy once divided between denial and survival is now unified, flowing like a river toward creation, connection, and purpose. It is often said that children are full of energy because they carry so little of the past. Their laughter is unrestrained, their curiosity boundless, because they are not yet burdened with decades of unacknowledged wounds. When adults begin to integrate their shadows, they often feel a return to this childlike vitality, not the naivety of childhood, but the freshness of spirit that comes from no longer being at war with oneself. They rediscover the joy of simple things, the excitement of trying new paths, the openness to life's possibilities. This is why energy becomes a measure of freedom. You can feel the difference in yourself and in others. There are those who, though busy, radiate vitality because their energy flows freely. And there are those who, though idle, are perpetually exhausted because their energy is trapped in inner battles. The difference is not the amount of work they do, but the amount of shadow they carry. To feel energy flowing instead of draining is to know that you are no longer living under the tyranny of what you have buried. It means that your past is no longer stealing from your present. It means that life itself, with all its challenges and demands, is no longer unbearable because you are no longer dragging invisible chains. This freedom does not come from outside. It is not given by circumstance. It comes from within, from the courageous act of facing what you once denied. When you arrive at this place, even difficulties are approached differently. The same obstacle that would have once drained you of strength now feels like an opportunity to grow. The same setback that once left you collapsed now awakens resilience. Energy flows not because life is without pain, but because you no longer resist the pain. You accept it, learn from it, and move through it. The shadow, once the thief of vitality, becomes the teacher of strength, and so the sign is unmistakable. When you wake with clarity instead of heaviness, when your creativity begins to move without obstruction, when you feel a current of energy where once there was only fatigue, you can be certain the shadow no longer dominates your energy. You are lighter, freer, more alive. You are no longer drained by the war within, but carried by the flow of life itself. There is a deep loneliness in living behind a mask. At first, it may not feel like loneliness because the mask often brings approval, attention, and even praise. You play the role expected of you, the reliable worker, the agreeable friend, the accommodating partner, and people respond with appreciation. On the surface, this seems like connection. But deep within, something aches because you know that what others admire is not truly you but the character you perform. The shadow whispers endlessly that who you really are is unworthy, unlovable, and unacceptable. It insists that only by hiding, only by suppressing your true feelings, only by pretending, can you maintain the love of others. And so you live a double life, outwardly pleasing, inwardly suffocating. This is one of the most common and subtle ways the shadow dominates. It convinces you that authenticity is dangerous. It tells you that if you reveal your anger, you will be abandoned. If you speak your desires, you will be rejected. If you show your flaws, you will be mocked. And so you learn to wear the appropriate masks. At work, you wear competence, even when you feel uncertain. With friends, you wear cheerfulness, even when you feel despair. In love, you wear selflessness, even when you are aching for reciprocity. Over time, you forget where the mask ends and where your true self begins. But living this way is costly. It drains your spirit. It breeds resentment, because deep down you long to be known, but you fear the price of showing yourself. You feel unseen in the very relationships where you most crave intimacy. You wake in the morning already weary, because even before you step into the world, you know you must put the mask back on. This is the life of one who has not yet faced the shadow. When the shadow begins to loosen its hold, a shift occurs. Slowly, you grow tired of the performance. You begin to feel the weight of the mask more than the fear of rejection, and in a quiet moment of courage, you test the possibility of authenticity. Perhaps you say no, when every instinct tells you to say yes, just to be liked. Perhaps you admit, "I'm struggling," instead of smiling and pretending all is well. Perhaps you reveal a piece of yourself you once thought unworthy of daylight. And to your surprise, the world does not end. Some may be startled, some may even withdraw, but others lean closer. They see you, the real you, and their love deepens. This is the turning point. Imagine someone who has spent their life saying yes to every request, afraid that refusal would mean abandonment. They burn themselves out, growing quietly bitter toward those who seem to take advantage of them. Yet in truth, they have been betraying themselves more than anyone else. The day they finally say no, calmly and without guilt, is the day they reclaim their soul. They discover that true love does not vanish when you set boundaries. In fact, the love that remains after you reveal your authentic self is the only love worth keeping, because it is love for who you are, not for the mask you wear. The liberation that comes with this realization is immense. You no longer wake each day rehearsing your role. You no longer measure every word for fear of disapproval. You no longer shape yourself into an image that others might find acceptable. Instead, you live in alignment with your true nature. Your energy, once wasted in pretending, flows into creating, connecting, and becoming. Relationships grow richer because intimacy requires truth, and truth can only exist without masks. There is, of course, risk in authenticity. Some people will fall away when they encounter the real you, but this is not loss, it is revelation. It shows you who was drawn only to the mask and who is capable of loving the whole. The shadow warns that authenticity leads to loneliness, but the truth is the opposite. Only authenticity can lead to genuine connection. What is the value of being surrounded by people who admire a version of you that does not exist? Better to have a handful of souls who embrace you fully than a crowd that never truly sees you. When you stop needing masks, you also stop demanding them from others. You no longer expect perfection or performance from those around you. You make space for their flaws, their fears, their truths, and in this mutual acceptance, love deepens into something unshakable. It is not built on appearances, but on the raw beauty of two imperfect souls daring to be real. The shadow loses its power when you no longer fear exposure. You stand in the light with all your contradictions, your strength and your weakness, your joy and your sorrow, your kindness and your anger, and you say, "This is who I am." And when you see that you are still standing, when you see that the world continues, when you see that some people draw closer instead of turning away, you understand that love built on masks was never love at all. This realization does not make you reckless. It does not mean spilling every thought without care or refusing all compromise. Authenticity is not brutality. It is not selfishness disguised as honesty. It is the courage to align your outer life with your inner truth, to speak what matters, to set boundaries where needed, and to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of appearances. It is the freedom to live without the gnawing fear that your worth depends on constant performance. To walk this path is to feel lighter, freer, more alive. You reclaim the energy that was once spent in endless self-monitoring. You breathe more deeply, speak more openly, love more fully. Life, once filtered through the exhausting labor of performance, becomes direct and immediate. You discover joy in being, not in being admired, not in being approved, but simply in being. And this is how you know the shadow no longer dominates your energy, when you stop needing masks to be loved, when you no longer live in fear of being exposed, but in the strength of being revealed, when you no longer hide your soul, but allow it to stand, imperfect and luminous, in the gaze of the world. That is the moment authenticity takes its rightful place. That is the moment freedom begins. Wholeness does not arrive with a thunderclap. It comes quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night, when you suddenly realize that the parts of yourself you once tried to exile have found their rightful place within you. For so long, human beings have been taught to wage war with themselves. We are told to reject anger, suppress fear, deny desire, and present only what is polished and acceptable. But this fragmentation creates a battlefield within the soul. The shadow thrives in that battlefield, keeping you divided, keeping you ashamed, keeping you restless. The day you stop fighting and begin to listen, something profound begins to shift. You no longer look at yourself through the harsh lens of judgment, but through the deeper lens of understanding. I have seen many who lived their lives as if they were fractured glass, parts of them hidden, parts of them denied, parts of them despised. A man, for example, who believed anger was evil, suppressed it so deeply that it surfaced in destructive bursts. He would hurt those closest to him, then drown in guilt. Only when he began to ask, "What is this anger trying to teach me?" did he discover that it was not his enemy but his messenger. It was pointing to his lack of boundaries, showing him where he had allowed himself to be trampled. When he stopped treating his anger as a monster to be caged and began to welcome it as a guide, his inner storm began to settle. That is what it means to see wholeness instead of division. The same is true of fear. For many, fear is a sign of weakness, something to be silenced at all costs. Yet fear, when acknowledged, becomes a compass. It tells you where to prepare, where to tread carefully, where to grow stronger. A young woman once confided that she was paralyzed by fear every time she spoke in public. She tried to conquer it with force, to crush it with denial, but it only grew louder. Only when she admitted, "This fear is part of me, and perhaps it has something to say," did she realize it was not trying to destroy her. It was inviting her to prepare, to practice, to grow. Her fear was not a chain but a teacher, and when she embraced it, she spoke with a voice more authentic and more powerful than before. Even desire, often condemned as selfish or shallow, has its place in the landscape of the soul. Desire is the energy of movement, the spark that pulls us toward what is possible. When denied, it can twist into envy or obsession. When acknowledged, it becomes creativity and expansion. Consider the artist who longed to create, but buried her desires beneath years of obligation. She lived dutifully, but each day felt gray. Only when she finally gave herself permission to follow her longing, to paint and to write, did her vitality return. Desire was not her enemy. It was her life force calling her back to herself. This wholeness, this embracing of all that you are, does not mean indulgence or recklessness. It means integration. It means that instead of rejecting your so-called flaws, you sit with them, learn from them, and allow them to find their rightful place in the harmony of your being. When you do this, life ceases to feel like an endless tug-of war. The noise within quiets, not because you silenced your parts, but because they are finally working together. In this state, relationships transform. No longer do you project your hidden conflicts onto others. The one who despises their own weakness will constantly find weakness in others. The one who represses their envy will accuse others of being envious. But when you embrace your own wholeness, these projections dissolve. You look at another human being and see not a distorted reflection of your disowned self, but the fullness of who they are. Compassion replaces judgment, understanding replaces blame, and in that space love deepens. Decision-making also changes. When you are divided within, every choice feels like a battle. One part pulls you forward, another drags you back, and you live in hesitation, in conflict, in paralysis. But when you see yourself as whole, clarity emerges. You listen to each voice within you, acknowledge it, and then move in alignment with the deeper harmony of your being. Choices that once felt agonizing become natural, because you are no longer torn apart by inner contradiction. And perhaps the most beautiful shift of all is peace, not the fleeting peace that comes from avoiding problems, but the enduring peace that comes from self-acceptance. It is the peace of sitting quietly with yourself and feeling no need to escape. It is the peace of knowing that nothing within you is your enemy, only a part of the whole. It is the peace of living in harmony with your nature, not against it. Wholeness does not erase the challenges of life, but it transforms how you walk through them. Instead of meeting conflict as a fractured soul, you meet it as an integrated being. Instead of fearing your own depths, you explore them with curiosity. Instead of denying your humanity, you embrace it fully. And in doing so, you discover that the shadow no longer dominates your energy, not because it has disappeared, but because it has been welcomed home. That is the true liberation. To see yourself not as a war between light and dark, but as a living tapestry where every thread belongs. When you no longer divide your soul into acceptable and unacceptable, when you can sit with anger, fear, desire, and love as parts of the same whole, you finally become free. You are no longer drained by the inner struggle. You are no longer a stranger to yourself. You are whole, and in that wholeness, life itself begins to flow through you with a power and a peace you may have once thought impossible. When the shadow no longer dominates, life is not free of challenges, but it is free of inner sabotage. You move through the world with clarity, compassion, and authenticity. You are no longer driven blindly by wounds, but guided by conscious choice. This is the path of liberation, not escaping who you are, but embracing all of it, integrating every piece until you stand whole. That wholeness is power. That wholeness is freedom.